Hi, everyone. Welcome to Truth in the Barrel. I'm Amy McGrath with my co-host, Denver Riggleman. And today we have the Devil's Cut episode with a very, very special guest, Nicole Malachowski, the first woman Thunderbird pilot in the United States Air Force, among many other amazing things she's done. I cannot wait to talk with her.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's a joy to be here.
Good morning. We're so happy to see you.
Happy to see you too.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today. And then first of all, Nicole, it's just an honor to get to meet you and talk with you. I've known about you and seen you for many, many years as somebody who, was a woman in the armed forces. It's just wonderful to get a chance to get to know you a little bit more.
Well, the same right back to you. I've been obviously following your career, and I think our military careers were very parallel.
They were. And of course, you have a lot in common with Denver, who also was in the Air Force for many years.
Indeed.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you about Seymour Johnson, too. That was our sister wing from Mountain Home Air Force Base when we were the Air Expeditionary Ring. But I think I'm older, so I'm much older, I think, Nicole. So
I don't know about much older, Denver.
Well, before we jump into it, I do want to tell our listeners a little bit about you, Nicole, and I'm not going to go through the whole bio, but I want to let everybody know something about being in the military. For those of us that have been in the military, we sort of read bios and we look at them and we can tell it almost immediately, is this person the real deal or not? And I have to tell you, reading your bio, it is just incredible. Like my head exploded. I was like, wow, this person is no kidding the real deal. Top in her class at the Air Force Academy, flew not only F-15s, but also F-16s. And for those of you who aren't fighter pilots, that's kind of a big deal to fly two different types of fighter planes. And then to go on in your career to be a commander, to be a White House fellow, to be at the top of your class at the Naval War College. I mean, it is just incredible. And all of those things, I have to ask, because you have flown both the F-15 and the F-16, which at the time that you flew them were the best that the Air Force had in terms of fighter planes, right?
They were. They definitely were at the time.
Which one was better? Which one did you like to fly better?
I get asked this question a lot, and it's a totally reasonable question. I often say it's a little bit like apples and oranges, though, because the F-15E Strike Eagle is the jet I began my career in. That's the jet that I flew operationally. I led my peers in combat in that jet. It's always going to be, if you will, my first love. The F-16 itself was certainly a heck of a lot of fun to fly, but I only flew that during the air show season with the Thunderbirds. So I never really knew how to fly the F-16 as a complete weapon system. So at the end of the day, I'm always going to say the F-15E Strike Eagle. Also, my husband was a weapons systems officer, so if I hadn't have flown Strike Eagles, I wouldn't have met him.
That is awesome.
Did you meet your husband when he was a Wizzo, when you guys were in training or something like that?
That's a funny story, actually. Yes, indeed. We met in my very first fighter squadron, which was at the 492nd Fighter Squadron at RAF Lakenheath out there in the United Kingdom. And as I was going through combat mission ready, this is when I met him. I flew one sortie with him. He was a brand new instructor. And this was well before we started dating, but it's kind of funny because I remember looking at his last name and I couldn't pronounce it. I'm like, Malachowski. And I used to make fun of his last name. Little did I know I would take that name, and I've been living with it for 24 years as Malachowski. But also, I actually failed the ride for going supersonic over Land's End. So my husband.
You broke some air. Oh my gosh, I love it.
It was
embarrassing
and an embarrassing story to tell. But at the end of the day, it's kind of funny. My maiden name was Ellingwood. Married name is Malachowski. And so on that grade sheet, there's an Ellingwood and a Malachowski and a grade in red ink. So I did that sortie again.
That's fantastic. I was going to say, Nicole, a buddy of mine got his call sign Rachel because he actually went supersonic over Rachel, out there outside of Nellis.
Absolutely.
So he got his call sign because he broke that air reg. So did you get a call sign from that, or where did you get your call sign from?
Well, I didn't get a call sign from that specific event, but as you know, call sign an amazing fighter pilot tradition, right? You get those when your squadron is ready to fly with you in war. And of course, there's no higher compliment than someone saying, I want you to be my wingman. The other thing call signs do is they're always making fun of somebody, right? A mistake you made, a personality quirk, something like that. And my call sign, which of course struck fear in the hearts of enemies everywhere, was Fifi, F-I-F-I. And I'll be honest, the full story is certainly not safe for work. So I'm going to spare the podcast here. I promise someday I'll write the full story.
Mine isn't either.
Full story in my book. But as Amy can probably recall, when you start flying as a woman in the fighter squadron in the 90s, right? I was 23 years old, 23 pounds lighter. I walked into that squadron and the guys were like, what the heck is this? Right? Is she strong enough? Is she confident enough? Is she going to mess up the bro culture? And so during that year that I was getting combat mission ready, I just was really hard on myself, was trying really hard, to fit in, I think, and to be the best wingman that I could be. And essentially at the end of it, the guys were like, you're kind of like this cute little Fifi poodle, but if people bend down to pet you, you'll attack. So that's
great.
Side story. The actual details are a little more off color.
I get it.
That's great. What's the name of your book?
I don't have my book right now. I'm working on it. I don't have it yet. But I will tell you, I am working on a book that's very important to me that is not about me. It's about the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, and specifically the pursuit of the Congressional Gold Medal. And so it's been 15 years since they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. I'm going back and writing about the small team that worked together to make that happen, especially just to keep the WASP memory alive, especially in light of what we're seeing today, right? Which is the censorship and the removal, of service member and veteran stories.
And you were an integral part of making that happen, right? Because you were a White House fellow at the time, and you sort of made that happen.
Well, there was indeed a small team of us that made that happen. I was proud to be a part of that team. I can tell you that by being a White House fellow at the time, I had access to doors that I could finally walk through. There were people who were working on this or had ideas like this for quite some time, but people just didn't have the access. So when I found myself in a position to utilize that, for good, then I teamed up with these other folks who hopefully everyone will read about in the book. And we were able to get that Congressional Gold Medal through.
Yeah, that's so important. And we also, you're telling your story of meeting your husband. I met my husband in a similar way. I was a backseater, and I went from backseat in the F-18 Delta to the F-18 Charlie and Delta, as a front seater. And as I went through training to become a pilot, he was one of my instructors. Now, he was a helicopter pilot.
All right.
But he, in the naval aviation pipeline, you have to go back and do training from the very beginning again. Mm-hmm. And so I was the highest paid flight student, as an 03, as a captain. And it was a great tour. And that's where I met my husband. And, so very similar story there.
Outstanding. Yeah. You got to go home and talk about the days flying with someone who understands it.
I know, so, even today.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to tell you, and I won't call you Fifi because but you have Krusty and Chunk here. So my call sign's Chunk. We have Krusty. She's talking to you right now. So we have Fifi, Krusty, and Chunk coming to you right now. But I want to ask you really quick. Seymour Johnson, you were there in 2011. Mm-hmm. At that point, was it still an Air Expeditionary Wing, or were you there you were a commander there at the 333rd, correct?
Yeah. So in 2011, I commanded the 333rd Fighter Squadron, which was actually the FTU, or the Flying Training Unit. So I had a cadre of the most elite instructor pilots in the world, and we were putting through several classes, at a time of F-15E students. We did have 2 operational squadrons on base there that were deploying as part of the Air Expeditionary Wing. And sometimes, interestingly, instructor pilots from the FTU, from my squadron, would actually augment the squadrons that were deploying operationally. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah, that's and the reason that I just think it's so great. Amy was talking about, and I'm always in awe of Amy too. I was just an intelligence officer, but we can talk about that incredible thing later, there, ma'am.
That qualifier, just you were.
No, I had a hell of a fun time. Seymour Johnson was our sister wing. Mountain Home was the Air Expeditionary Wing when 9/11 happened, and we went right when that happened. Back in the day. That's why I was saying, looking at 2011, I'm like, man, gosh, this is great. But no, going from F-15E to F-16, I had a mentor of mine. I don't know Lieutenant General Gene Santarelli.
Okay.
And he flew Vietnam era aircraft. And I remember him saying going to the F-16 from sort of the more unwieldy, two-seater aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, it was like just such an incredible evolution for him to jump in the F-16. I don't remember if he flew the F-4s, but, or something like that, or it might have been I'm trying to remember. But he flew some other aircraft. He flew about 5 or 6 different aircraft. But when Amy asked that question, it got to me is that I know that the F-15E Strike Eagle, that's actually what my intelligence training was in, just to let you know.
Awesome.
Was F-15Cs. Then I got to take apart F-16 CJs, but I got to do the harm targeting shooters. Then I went to the B-1s. So I had this, sort of incredible training around that. But I know you said F-15Es were your first love, and I get it, right? I do. Right, I love it.
Remember, that's the aircraft I could employ fully as a complete weapon system.
As a complete weapon system, and I get it. But, talking to Amy, going from, backseater to front seater and everything that she did, it had to be something, the difference in the F-15E flight dynamics to F-16 and what you could do with the Thunderbirds. I gotta think that was probably pretty cool, though.
Oh, it was a heck of a lot of fun. Look, the F-16 is highly maneuverable, super agile, much more so than the F-15E Strike Eagle, right? It's perfectly suited for the things that you do, of course, in an air show. And I would be lying if I said it wasn't an absolute hoot to fly the F-16. I mean, it's like a little sports car. And it fits
awesome.
you, when you're 5'4" like me, it fits you like a glove, right? I mean, in an F-15E, you can play tennis in the cockpit, but in an F-16, it fit you like a glove. I really felt like I was, part of the aircraft. So.
Well, I just want to let you know. I actually got a stick time in an F-16D model in the back seat. So I just want to, I'm pretty good at doing barrel rolls. I just want to let you know.
You are. How many G's did you get up to?
I think I think it's a max of 6 Gs because we were carrying that container on the bottom of the D model. Do you know what I'm saying?
Dan, how many times did you puke, brother?
Never. Well, that's a lie. They made me puke in a B1 after 4 hours of low level, but I had 8 pieces of French toast beforehand. Hence where I got, my call sign is Chunk, by the way. So I just want to let you guys know.
And now, but hey, look, I flew the F-15E, the F-16, like not bad for a gal that, went to high school in Las Vegas, Nevada. And what a great country I was born into, right? As a woman, to be born into a country where I was afforded these kinds of opportunities, where we have this kind of technology, where I was able to get over 1,000 hours in 2 of the world's greatest fighters. So I remain very grateful.
And you and I were lucky, right? Because the women before us did not have those opportunities. And that gets me to one of the things I really want to talk to you about, which is the current Department of Defense sort of whitewashing history and saying, hey, we're all the same now. Let's not talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. Let's not talk about, the 6888 or the Navajo Code Talkers or Nicole Malachowski. Let's not talk about her because that's divisive.
I mean, it's absolutely, I think, appalling. I think it's completely shameful. The idea that our federal government is willing to go back and selectively delete and selectively edit out, specific service member and veteran stories is mind blowing to me. And keep in mind, they're not removing, deleting, or editing out, things that were misinformation or were factually incorrect. Right. They're literally taking away stories of facts-based, honorable, service. And I literally still haven't been able to get my arms around it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I always think of it as like you're stifling inspiration because, when I was a young naval aviator or aspiring naval aviator or aspiring Marine Corps officer, I looked at Alan Shepard and John Glenn as my heroes, but I also looked at Matisse Wright. And I also looked at Rosemary Mariner and all of these women. And it was because the military championed them. They talked about them, and that's how I knew their names. And that was so important. And I feel like these guys who they're saying, hey, we're going to now be a merit-based military. It's almost like, first of all, it's insulting.
Totally.
It's insulting to you. I mean, anybody that looks at your bio, I mean, it's got to say, well,
I always tell people, you can't fake doing that. You can either do it or you can't. So
exactly.
Yeah.
You can either land the jet or you can't.
Right.
You either fly it or you don't.
Indeed.
But we're not going to somehow turn ourselves into being, quote, colorblind, merit-based culture that promotes individual initiative, excellence, and hard work, as if we haven't been promoting excellence and hard work all together. And oh, by the way, I would say that, and this is just my opinion here, I'm not, you can chime in if you want, but the current leadership of the secretary, as the Secretary of Defense himself, to me, is not somebody who got there because of excellence and hard work and merit-based, in my mind.
Well, I mean, when you look at, former Secretary of Defenses and their qualifications, there's certainly a major gap there. I always want to honor anybody, who was willing, to serve their country. But the fact of the matter is he never really reached the levels of, if you will, executive or strategic leadership to have, I think, the experience or the wisdom, to make, I think, more informed decisions, if I'm putting it, nicely. There's a couple things I think going on here, right? 3 things that I can think of. There's the censorship, which just fundamentally, stifles critical thinking, right? It goes against free speech and it erodes democracy. I think there's this idea that you touched on, which is why we need to, I think, shine a light on firsts and when barriers are broken, right? It's so that we remember that there was a time when there weren't women flying fighter aircraft, when there was a time when we had a segregated military, that we honored those firsts so that we never go back. And so that we keep the door open so that there can be another Krusty and another Fifi and another Chunk, right, to come along as second, thirds, and fourths. But you're hitting on a third point, which is important, which is the inspirational aspect of it. Just like you, man, I looked up to the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, right? Knowing their story in middle school meant something to me. I mean, I remember reading about Robin Olds, right? And Chappie James, right? One of the greatest fighter pilots of all time. And those stories inspired me. And then I find myself going to the Air Force Academy the very, right at the time that they're lifting the ban on women to be fighter pilots. And Jeannie Leavitt, right? Jeannie Leavitt, America's first woman fighter pilot as a lieutenant, is all over the news. And I'm thinking, man, she's doing it. And that means I can do it. And that idea that representation matters is so fact-based. I spent the first half of my career, Krusty, and I don't know if you felt this way. I hated nothing more than being called the woman fighter pilot. I couldn't stand being called the first Thunderbird pilot. I wanted to just take that woman qualifier and just throw it away because I just wanted to be known as a great fighter pilot or, a good Thunderbird pilot. And then I went to my very first air show. So I'm mid-career now, 30 years old, senior captain. I go to my first air show and I'm on the autograph line for the first time. First of all, I'm exhausted because I worked hard on that air show. Second of all, I'm dripping sweat. I was sitting there thinking, hey, that went well. Like nothing bad happened. I was, there's just an adrenaline dump. And now I've got to go to the autograph line and interact with people and be energetic and happy. And I remember being on that autograph line and there was all sorts of media there because first woman Thunderbird pilot, right? And I'm looking down at the other male pilots, great teammates, fantastic men, fantastic friends. They've got like 10, 20 people standing in front of them. And all of a sudden it was like slow motion, you guys. I looked up and in front of me, there was a line easily 100 deep. This was in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And what do you think the demographic of that line looked like?
All girls.
Right? A bunch of young women, right?
Yeah.
From the ages of about 10 to 16. And they were looking at me as if I had hung the moon, right? And it was in that moment that I realized it means something to see someone who looks like you succeed. Yep. And it wasn't about me or my name. It's that my presence, it allowed them to believe in their own dreams, right? That whether it was flying aircraft or joining the military or not, that these things were possible. And so for you to say we're very lucky is so true, right? Talk about being born in the right country at the right time. My successes that are on that, resume or whatever are the result of TLC, timing, luck, and circumstance, and a heck of a lot of hard work by other people who invested and mentored me.
Yeah, it's huge.
I have to say this. I have 3 daughters and 3 granddaughters, Fifi, wonderful. Right? And they would be in that line if you were there. And I know that you wanted to take away it. And if I may speak, I think I can say some things that are, maybe others can't. Right? Here's the thing. First, when you look at Hegseth, I think his inferiority complex, his histrionics about DEI is exactly, I think what you and Amy were pointing out is I don't think he has the requisite executive experience, but he was a guy who came up in Fox News. Let's be honest, right? And when you talk about disinformation and misinformation, and as you know, Nicole, this is something that's dear to me. When you talked about not removing that, but removing you from a website, it's almost like a throat punch to anybody who's facts-based or sanity-based, but it's also a throat punch to those who really respect those who are trailblazers. And if you look at you and Amy, you're trailblazers. And I know you want to throw away that, first female, Thunderbird, right, and things like that. But I think that's exactly why I would be in that line with my daughters and my granddaughters, is because you're that, and because Amy's that. I want them to know about you. I want my granddaughters, Bo, Isla, and Freya, to know about Amy and Nicole. I don't want them to know about Pete Hegseth. I couldn't care less. And I think that's what's so incredible about this conversation for me is, when I look at my daughters and what they've accomplished, and now I have my little granddaughters, I want them to be like both of you. I want them to say, hey, like my daughter, right? The youngest, female distiller, right? But she wasn't just the youngest woman distiller in the country. She was the youngest distiller. Right. And, so master distiller. So those are the kind of things that what you're doing, you're a trailblazer. It's every time I'm on a show with Amy, I think the same way. And I'm not just trying to flatter. There is a point here. Okay. And the point is I think when you're looking at them trying to erase the history of those who are trailblazers, especially with those like you, I think what you're looking at is this inferiority and this sort of this, I hate to say it, this male-dominated way of looking at the military that really has nothing to do with the incredible things that you've accomplished. And I think that's what makes me angry, is that as military brothers and sisters, we should be looking at what we accomplished based on merit-based, because that's what we were taught to do. So this bullshit, right, of just white males with their pictures hanging in a freaking hallway is a little bit odd. It's a little bit weird. It's very weird. And I think that's why I know you and Amy want to take that away. But for me, with my daughters and granddaughters, I'm going to say, look at Amy McGrath, but look at Nicole. Look at what they've done. And I think that's why I do sort of like the fact that you are trailblazers.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I hope you are hearing in that story. On that day at age 30, I evolved. Right, that day I realized it does mean something, and now it's on me. It's my responsibility now, to live up to this, and that I need to be accountable to these young faces, that are looking up to me. And over the last 20 years, I've lived my life being very proud to be the first woman Thunderbird pilot, being very proud to be one of the first women, fighter pilots. And getting back to, Secretary Hegseth and the current president, I think what they've done, right, is they're kind of conflating this idea of DEI, which apparently my definition of it and theirs must be quite different.
Must be.
Right? The definition of DEI, they're conflating it with this idea of quotas, right? And they're saying quotas for everything, quotas and DEI are the same thing, and they're absolutely not. Look, I think there are reasonable critiques of quota systems. I also know that there are times, look at corporate America. I work in corporate America now, right? A company, maybe based on its company values or cultures, wants to set a standard or a quota to say, hey, we want 50% of our board to be women. They are absolutely entitled to do that. I can see how people would be like, well, I don't want quotas, in the military for promotions or for certain duty assignments. I think both of you would agree with that. But what they're doing is they're equating DEI with quotas. I always tell people DEI is not stopping meritocracy. DEI, when done well and when executed as intended, is what enables meritocracy.
Right. It's lifting it up. And exactly, you're exactly right. And just to focus on the military, it's this idea that we want the best talent. We want the best talent. And when Nicole, when you're out there and you were a Thunderbird is 30 years old and you had that line of young women, hundreds lined up for you, we want that talent in the military. Because not all of them are going to be capable, willing, but some of them are.
Absolutely.
And they could be the best next lethal, because, they love to use those words, lethal. They could be the next lethal fighter pilot out there and the best coming down the pike. And that's what this nation needs.
And we need our military to reflect the face of the country that it represents. There's foundational good, right, in that. And Secretary Hegseth, I think, needs to be concerned with the ramifications of this kind of censorship, right? And the book bannings that we have at the war colleges and the academies. Look, it's a recruitment and retention issue. Like you, Krusty, I'm sure that you are mentoring lots of people who want to learn to fly, or young gals, young boys who want to join the military. When this all started going down in March, which ironically, right, was Women's History Month, I had been mentoring a young Black man from in high school from Chicago, who was wanting to join the military and become a fighter pilot. Who does he look up to? The Tuskegee Airmen, Chappie James, all those things, right? And all of a sudden he is sending me emails going, is this really happening? Like, I can't believe that the Air Force I want to join is censoring, the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm not sure I want to join an Air Force that does that. That's a recruitment issue. Also, like you, I am consistently mentoring women who are still currently in the military. I have had several, and I'm talking close to 10 at least, and I'm not exaggerating, over the last 3 months, write to me and say, I'm not sure I want to re-enlist anymore. But women officers who are like, you know what, I'm not sure I'm going to put my name in for the command board because, it's clear that we're not wanted here, or people are going to turn around and say it's DEI and woke, and I don't want to live with that specter over my shoulder. So for Secretary Hegseth, if he can't get behind the fundamental, I think, wrongness of the censorship, can we at least get behind the pragmatic impact it's having on recruitment and retention?
Yeah. And that's a long-term thing.
Absolutely.
I think the country does just get more diverse. And I'll have to say this, I think, and I'll humbly submit this. It does seem like if we take away reasonable arguments, I think anti-DEI is anti-talent, but I do think it's also listen, Nicole, you probably know I was in the Republican Party, right? I don't want to get too political here. It's really not political, but it seems like there is a real underlying racism, misogyny, anti-intellectual pursuit here when you're talking about book banning, but you're also talking about getting rid of those trailblazers off of websites, which is a little ludicrous. I mean, do you think that maybe some of the commanders, and Amy, if I'd had discussion, Amy's like, but do you think some of the commanders might have overreacted with the DEI when you're talking about not even those putting in for these spots, but do you think they overreacted by scrubbing, so many things based on what their arbitrary definition of DEI was?
No, I don't. And here's why, because I've been, without giving away names, because I fear of retribution for them, I've been talking to people on the inside at the highest levels of public affairs. If you look at the memo that was signed and written directing this, I think it was dated 26 February 2025, titled Digital Content Refresh. You're welcome to go look at that. It's very clear on what it was directed. Following that memo, internal emails went out with a complete list of the terms. And those terms included things like woman, right? Or diversity. And so those things were pulled. Now, here's the question, right? So critics will say to me, well, this wasn't what President Trump and Secretary Hegseth intended, right? It was what malicious intent or malicious compliance, I think is what people have said. Let me give that to some people. Let's say there was malicious compliance. We also have something in the military called commander's intent, right? Kristen, you guys both remember.
Right.
That's where I'm going.
In the
Absolutely.
friction of war, it doesn't meet the rules of engagement or the special instructions. We fall back on what is the commander's intent before I take action. And if commander's intent is misinterpreted or misimplied, whose responsibility is it to fix it? The commander. And so the Trump administration absolutely has even an out here right now to go back and say, I am the commander in chief. This was not my commander's intent. Let's fix this.
But they haven't.
They have not.
That's
and in fact, I would say
evident.
They doubled down on it because the memo from the Department of Defense stated early May, I think it was May 8th, was basically saying, go take the books off the shelves.
Right. The books. I mean, and to get back to Denver really quickly, Chunk, when I found out they had removed articles on me, I kind of was just scoffing because these were articles. Look, I've been retired 7 years. These articles were 10, 20 years old.
Oh, yeah.
We're going back and deleting. It's nothing more than a modern day electronic book burning. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to a part of your career, though, Nicole, that was, I think, at the end where you were selected to be in the work within the Biden administration on veterans and military families. Now, you had already had the experience of being a White House fellow, which is really cool. So you had already sort of been in that arena before, and then you were selected to come back and work on this initiative. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and maybe a comparison to what you see happening to veterans right now with the current administration.
Yes. So to your point, I served as a White House fellow under George Bush and then President Obama when he came in. So 6 months under each administration, which was fascinating in and of itself to watch a presidential transition from literally the inside. Came back in 2015 under the end of the Obama administration. So I was working as the director of the White House's Joining Forces Initiative, directly advising then First Lady Michelle Obama and Dr. Jill Biden on all issues, everything
Okay.
related to service members, veterans, and military families, education, spouse employment, veterans homelessness, literally the entire gamut. I don't see joining forces in the current administration. It would have been nice to have them, continue with that initiative. I mean, I don't know that many people can throw spears at what the joining forces mission and purpose, was. But during that time when I was in the White House, I mean, service members, veterans, the military were on the docket to talk about every single day. There wasn't a day that went by that the First Lady, then Michelle Obama, wasn't asking and inquiring what needs to be done, where are the challenges, where can we, take away bottlenecks, where can we put the power and the prestige of the White House behind to, influence good behavior in the veteran hiring space. I mean, it happened every single day. The only thing I hear coming out of the White House nowadays is we're removing people's, stories. I mean, it was to the point that there was a friend of mine outside of Phoenix, Arizona. They were having their annual, veterans kind of event honoring women veterans. And they asked the local base, as they had done for decades. And keep in mind, local elected officials were there. This was the mayor. This was the full thing. They've been doing this for decades. They wrote to the local base and said, hey, can you please send out, as you always do, your national anthem singer? We would love to have a military person in uniform sing the national anthem, as we do through public affairs. They were turned down and told, we're really sorry. We know we've done this for decades, but we can no longer do it because your event says women veterans and we're not allowed to do that due to the new DEI. I mean, that happened.
You got to be kidding.
We should be ashamed.
Shameful.
It's just shit. Oh my God.
And meanwhile, we're, looking at cutting 80,000 people from the VA to help veterans in the veteran workforce. We're looking at, 30% of the federal workforce are veterans, and we're cutting them left and right. I mean,
and that impacts recruitment and retention. If people look at the VA and go, we're not going to get what was promised to us when we raised our hand to the Constitution, that was a compact between us and the American people when we decided to put on our nation uniform. And now we're not getting that, whatever, the end part of the contract back. They're not honoring their part of it. That's a recruitment and retention issue also.
Yeah. So Nicole, you're working on your book. You're in Colorado Springs or around there.
Around there, yeah.
What else? What are you in? You're in the corporate world now?
Yeah. So I guess part of my story, that's a big part of my story, is my career came to an end very unexpectedly, very abruptly, and very much overnight. When I was serving in the White House that second time in the joining forces role, I fell severely ill, like overnight. I won't get into all the details here. We could probably do a whole nother podcast on that. But long story short, I ended up with a major brain infection. It left me bedridden for 9 months, couldn't walk, talk, read, or write. And then I had to do another 1.5 years in rehab in order to get back to the quality of life and function that you see today. So I lost 2 years of my life. During that time, I went through a medical evaluation board, and I was medically retired from the career I loved so much. It still hurts. But at the end of the day, this might surprise the listeners. I was medically retired. And in fact, because I was coming on here, I pulled this up to look at it because I hadn't seen it in a while. So forgive me. Got to put on my, this is how you know you're a full-bird colonel, right?
Is that how you know that? No, I know you're a colonel.
You got the readers.
That's right. That's how 06s go to meetings, right?
There's bifocal readers.
I know. I need to get those. My Air Force Form 356 dated 21 July 2017 found 100% quote unfit for duty due to chronic systemic tick-borne illness. So a tick bite is what ended my career. I went from this really kind of elite, high performing, physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit person to just completely broken overnight. And at the end of the day, my career, was gone. And I sat there thinking, who am I if I'm not wearing my nation's uniform? What is my contribution to society if I'm not a fighter pilot? And how am I going to provide for my family? And it was in those deep and dark moments of 2017 that I really had to think about how am I going to reinvent myself. And so long answer to your short question, Krusty. People always say, I'm so sorry you can't fly anymore, because I still have a lot of brain damage and a lot of stuff that impacts my balance and all of that. I always tell them it's not the flying that I miss. It's being a part of high performing teams. It's about leadership and it's about teamwork. And so I reinvented myself kind of as a leadership consultant and a professional speaker. So I work with corporate America to try to hone elite team performance for them, to build teamwork, to build trust, and I think to embrace vulnerability. And so I very selfishly fill that hole in my heart by being a part of these corporate teams, kind of as I make my way around their different events.
So
That
Nicole,
is cool.
I can call you when I want my AI company to be inspired, because I would love that if you would come and talk to them for sure.
I would love it too.
I would love to have you. And also, as far as tick-borne illnesses, I mean, I have a pretty bad one myself right now. It's nothing like that. Sounds like, did you have encephalitis from the tick bite?
So I didn't get full-on encephalitis. What happened was, to be very specific, the infection got into my brainstem, specifically an area at the top of the brainstem called the pons. The pons is what controls your autonomic nervous system. It's like the worst place in your brain to like get an infection. So I did not advance to encephalitis, but I had infectious lesions on my brainstem.
I'm so sorry. No, my tick bite, I have alpha-gal. I'm allergic to all mammal meats right now. So it's,
yes.
But my wife and I got it because we live out in the woods. And if you were around DC, my guess is you probably got it hiking somewhere. You were down in Rock Creek Park or something.
I actually got it when I was the commander of the 333rd in North Carolina. We were doing our annual SEER training, right? So we were out there crawling around in the woods. We didn't talk about tick bite prevention. We didn't talk about tick proper removal. We never were educated at that time on what symptoms to look for. And when I presented several months later with multi-systemic problems, my flight surgeon, my military doctor, looked me in the eye and he said, "We don't have Lyme disease in North Carolina." And that was the day that I became chronically ill forever. May is indeed Lyme disease and Tick-borne illness awareness month. So I'm glad we are bringing this up. The most important thing, friends, is to prevent the bite. Permethrin and Picardin are your friends. And if people go to my any of my social media, which is at Real Malachowski, I have a Linktree link. If you go to that Linktree link and you scroll down, it's got everything you need to know about tick bite prevention.
Done.
Wow.
We're going to do it.
Don't end up like me.
Important. So important. I remember going through Marine Corps training, we did care a lot about the ticks because we were out there in the field a long time, but I don't know that we were as proactive as we should have been.
And I think education-wise, I've been very involved in the patient advocacy space and very much a pain in the butt to the Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs on tick-borne illnesses since then. I think fundamentally, Krusty, there was a difference in training because Army and Marines on the ground, rooting around. Air Force back then, we weren't really active.
You're like, how quickly can I get this training done and get back to my nice air-conditioned
you know
office?
what? Hold on a second. Listen, golf courses have a lot of ticks. And we had to have, come on now, because when I'm out there and you're on the golf course and say I'm in a bunker, I'm not worried about it. But if I go into the rough, we could get tick-borne illnesses, Amy. So I think you need to be a little bit easier on the Air Force here when you're talking that way. It's really hurtful.
Yeah. Did you guys actually have to sleep outside, like in a tent, or was that?
No. Oh gosh, no. We only spent like a half.
Well, I did actually. I lived in Tent City. The issue, though.
Marine.
Well, the thing is that they had the air conditioning set down too low because it got really cold in the tents because we had the big air conditioners in the tents. And I had to complain that, listen, we want our air conditioning between 66 and 70, not 62 when we're in tents in the desert. So I was really not happy about too much Freon in the air conditioning units for the tents. Really,
gotcha. In all seriousness, I do take the Department of Defense and VA to task on this. I serve as an official ambassador and mentor still to this day with the official Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. In fact, I'm doing an Air Force Wounded Warrior Program event this upcoming weekend. And there isn't a month that goes by that I am not helping an airman who is being medically retired or evaluated for tick-borne illness.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
What cohort of the American public is exposed to more global vectors than our service members, by nature, by default, the veterans they become, and the military family stationed around the world? There is absolutely no excuse for the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense to not be leaders in this space as far as education, awareness, diagnostics, and treatment. And in fact, when I just read you my form, 100% unfit for duty due to chronic systemic tick-borne illness. It took me 4 years of fighting
Yeah.
This is going to get me emotional. Woo. 4 years for the VA to recognize the very thing that I was found 100% unfit for duty for, to the point that they didn't have a code for what I had.
Yeah.
So I was medically retired with a code that the VA wasn't prepared to receive. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. I can say I took that to task. And with the Wounded Warrior program out of Florida, we were able to get Congress to add in those codes. And so now, at least,
it's so important. I mean, I work with IAVA, which is the Iraq Afghanistan Veterans of America. I'm on their board. They were part of the push to get the PACT Act passed. That's the act that, helps veterans who have toxic fume exposure. Yes. I mean, all of these things, it seems in the weeds, but this stuff is so important to veterans. It's so important to people who signed the dotted line to Uncle Sam that said, you can send me anywhere for 4 years or more. And now they're having, medical problems because of that. We need to take care of the people who served our country.
America's promise. It's the fundamental promise. I was 17 years old when I took that first oath to the Constitution. And if we don't follow through on America's promise, we have no moral standing or ethical standing, to back us up as Americans. And at the end of the day, it is fundamentally wrong, and it impacts recruitment and retention.
It does. And there's always this push in my mind I hate to say it, and it's not to be political, but it seems to be from the right to always try to cut costs. Let's cut the VA. Let's cut the workforce, the benefits. And I'm sick of it.
I agree with you. It is frustrating. It's exhausting. It's tiring, and it's completely unnecessary.
Well, not only were you a trailblazer in your career, Nicole, but you're a trailblazer in making sure people are taken care of. And it seems like that's what you do in your life. It's just it's an amazing honor just to meet you and talk to you and to have these type of discussions. I got to tell you, it's, every day I'm happy to be with Amy, right? It's incredible that we have this chance to do this show together. And the fact that you would agree to come on here, share your stories. But no, I think, once I'm back in Congress, Amy's laughing, or once I'm governor, right, I'm going to make sure you come back, right, and help me with legislation to help others, because I tell you, you're an inspiration.
Or Nicole, Colorado needs some good leaders.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking specifically like Colorado 5th District, maybe some others.
Colorado
so
5,
you need to.
What do you think, Nicole?
Think about our country. Our country needs better leaders, and you're one of them.
Well,
I mean, you are the real deal.
Thank you.
And so, whatever you decide to do in the future,
thank you.
I know there's a lot of people are going to be behind you.
I appreciate your kind compliment. I will tell you that with my complex chronic illness, which you guys can't see today, and your viewers and listeners, aren't recognizing it. It makes it hard at this point, but I have belief that I'm going to continue to heal and get better. And so maybe running for office is an opportunity in the future.
Awesome.
What an honor. Thank you, Nicole.
An honor to meet you. Thanks for your time.